Austin, he's retired EPA, 33 years, chemist, you name it, RECRA. He's science coordinator for the Inland Bay Foundation, and I will tell you that I know what reports cost when you go to experts, the communities. This man is well probably putting $20,000 of his time in doing this. Totally flawless. So thank you, Tom.
Well, that's a heck of an introduction. And as Marie said, I live over Rehoboth, and I worked with EPA in this area for 33 years. First at the laboratory in Annapolis as the organic section chief and lab manager, and then, as always, for advancement, you've got to go somewhere else for more pay. So after 17 years in the laboratory, I moved to Washington, D.C. and wrote regulations for the next 17 years, and did a lot of industry studies. And my expertise is in hazardous waste management, treatment, disposal. And my check from the EPA was pretty much always paid by Superfund. This plant was not on my radar. I'm currently a science advisor or science coordinator for the Inland Bays Foundation. Chuck Sonner here is also on the board there. This site was not on our radar. Kenny Hayes, his wife, Joanne, and I came to one of our board meetings in late October. And he came back in November, and Kenny brought me a CD. And this CD was all supporting laboratory information. It's like a 1,000-page document on one CD. And you know what? There was nothing in it. It was a red herring. It was calibration curves and QC data, and not one piece of analytical data in the entire 1,000 pages. So, like, where's the meat? So, being an ex-EP employee and very familiar with databases and very familiar with Generate's databases, I had to go find out where the meat was. And I found the 1,000-page site investigation report for this site. Now, the public is not familiar with these large documents. I've gone through hundreds of them while I worked with the agency. And I found things that were missing. And if I got the first slide, let's try to just sort of really just jump in. One of the things that was missing was what's the available data for wells surrounding the facility? Because really the key question to be answered is, has contamination moved off the site? If contamination is moved off the site, it becomes the responsibility of the new owner if they do anything that makes it move further or impair the cleanup of the site. So when a property transfer happens in a large industrial site, the new owner is pretty much stuck with what he knows, and if he doesn't know it's off-site and it comes to knowledge later, he's now responsible. But if his new operations do anything to make it worse, make it move, he's responsible. Now, you would have thought that the first big document I reviewed, it's a paper chase. Some poor staff engineer of one of these firms went through 1,000 pages of documents in the state and copied them all up and arranged them in a very set format for experts to review. Well, one of the things they didn't look at was the public wells nearest the site. There are two trailer parks adjacent to the site. One is Holiday Acres, and you could throw a football from their well onto the site. It's that close. The other site is Colonial Estates. It's about 800 feet across the road along Austin Point Road. I pulled from the state health department all the records for those two wells. Sodium is found to be increasing over time. The records are all kind of compressed here, so you can't read them, but the numbers start in 2001 and go to late 2013. Sodium is found to be increasing. Sulfate is much higher at the colonial estates, which is further down gradient. The Holiday Acres estate is up gradient of the water flow, groundwater flow. Holiday is, colonial estates is down gradient. It's a shallower well. It's only like 70 to 80 feet deep. The colonial estates well is a deeper well and appears to be out of the plume. The next one. Chloride, sort of the same thing. It's kind of starting to decrease, but it's also very elevated. Total dissolved solids is a little harder, but again, colonial estates is more elevated than the Holiday. The next slide. And this is pH. What happened at the site? They made pickles. How many home canners are in here? A couple. Pickling, salt, brine, vinegar, alum to make your pickles crisp. Although the numbers here don't look very different for pH. It's a log scale. It's really a much bigger difference. Normal pH in your well should be 6.5 to 7. These are low in the range. They're almost all below 6.5. Another measure of the effects of pH is alkalinity, which is the buffering capacity of the system. Normal wells in this area should be 60 to 70. The colonial estates well down gradient has been severely impacted, and you can see that how much the buffer capacity is reduced by exposure to acid coming off the site. Next. Now, we presented that data December 17th at the public hearing. Also on December 17th, we presented data that the community had collected. Mr. Clates and Ken went door to door offering free water tests to 25 homes. And this starts looking at some of those 25 homes and their results. For pH, it's really hard to see the difference because the numbers don't change that much. We're talking, but the lowest value seen was 4.8. Pure vinegar out of the bottle, pH 4.5. Next. Alkalinity, all these numbers are 4s, 5s. It should be 70. Next slide. Sulfate. What is pickling spice? Alum. Potassium aluminum sulfate. It just so happens that in this area there's very little sulfate in groundwater. So this is a very good marker that if it's there, it came from the site. It's not natural in this area. And so we use this to really pick where we want to sample later on. But all these values of finding sulfate, we shouldn't be finding any. In fact, we actually have some samples across the creek over in across the Wharton's Bluff. None of those samples even contain sulfate. Next slide. Sodium gets a little complicated. This is one place where they sampled on site. And they had, for the other parameters, they didn't do those on site. But for sodium, they sampled on site. Lots of jumbled for a slide, but right through here, there's an area, they're all 40, 50 and above. Over here, there are almost 1,000. There was a spill on site of brine in August 2007, and that has migrated into this area. And groundwater flow from this site is reported to be somewhere between 6 inches and 1.5 feet a day. And if you measure the distance from where the spill happened to the Colonial Estates wellhead, which is about in here, now is about the time that it should be getting there. So it's at the minimum. This is largely probably seeing that spill that happened back in 2007. Next slide. Chloride, sort of the same thing. They're all slightly elevated what's natural in this area. Natural in this area should be 10, and we're twice that, and sometimes 5 times that. And where the spill happened, 1,000, 1,300. Next slide. Nitrate. Here you can actually see across the creek, no nitrate. On site, now down to 2. Down gradient, 5s and some up to over 10. I think the next slide shows the ones that are over 10. These homes here have nitrate levels above the Safe Drinking Water Act level 10. That's a federal standard that really protects mostly babies. Babies who drink water above 10 develop a blue baby syndrome. Next slide. This is really where I ended the presentation back in December. We argued that contamination had moved off-site. We had seen it in the community. How far had the plume gone? And that's, just back it, please. You can go back. If you live River Bend, Mount Laurel Lane, Pebble Beach, Sandy Beach Road, or along Arm Branch Road here, I don't know if your water's been contaminated because we haven't the resources to test, and the state hasn't tested. There is a program that anyone with a private well should avail themselves of. The health department, you have to go to Georgetown and pick up the sample containers and sample and take them back to Georgetown. But it only costs you $4. You should do it yearly. And if you live in those areas, I really recommend that you do it. Because if you find you have low alkalinity, if you find you have sulfate, those are 2 of the tests that they do for you. The chances are you should be more concerned if there's anything else in your water. And kind of move on to the next slide.
John?
Sure.
I have a few of those sample bottles left. If somebody wants to test their own water and take it to Georgetown, if they leave their name, I'll see that they got a sample to it.
Okay. This is, next slide. This is some information that we got after the hearing back in December. Through a FOIA, I requested all the on-site monitoring data from all the wells at the Pinnacle site. Now, just going back in time, what's happened at the site? They started operations in 1971, and they began applying a biological sludge from their operations. All of it's really an industrial sludge. Anything that didn't get in the pickle jar, the leaves, the dirt, the cuttings that didn't go and went through a grinder, went through a water treatment plant, and the solids that were left after that, the biomass, the fibers that didn't break down, went into a sludge pit. And from 1971 until 1988, that sludge was put on site with no regulation at 5 or 10 times the agronomic needs of the corn that were growing on the site at the time. And so they so contaminated the site with nitrate that the groundwater spiked above 120 milligrams per liter. 10 is safe. They were up here. In 1988, well, back up. Most of the environmental laws didn't exist in 71. Clean Water Act was passed in 72, 71. RECA was passed in 78. The Hazardous Waste and Solid Waste Amendments, which I worked on for a whole career, were passed in 1984. Denrick woke up in 1988 and says, "Oh my God, you made a mess of this place." Then they ordered that no more of that sludge be placed on site, and that a groundwater collection system be installed. And so they dug an array of wells along the